right, everyone, we are back for round two. You guys hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Great. All right, start doing the check-in, please. All right, 16 people. Come on, everyone, cameras on. Do the check-in real quick, please. Anthony, you went to the beach? Good. No, he's in the resort by Zoom. $26 people already signed in. Come on. Eight. Still a few people that did not check in. Come on, guys. And make sure your cameras are on. It's Dobson, still missing you. Here. All right, guys, so we're going to go into part two of agency. Very, very important. Part two of agency. Guys, make sure your cameras are on and pointing at you, please. At least that's where I stopped. All right. So this is where we stopped before the break. All right, just checking something quick. Janice, it doesn't show me here. For this session, part two, it doesn't show me yet. We're on page 145. Can you try again, Janice, please? from the All right, so we're going to move forward. All right, so agent's duties to the customer. Who's the customer? By now, everybody should know who the customer is. Let me know in the chat real quick, everyone. Who's the customer? Third party what? Third party. That did not hire you. And you don't represent. Very good. So every time you see customer, it's a third party that did not hire you, okay? Did not hire you, and you do not represent. They did not hire you, you do not represent. Ingrid, perfect. No obligations, right? Other than the basic obligations that we just talked about before. Being fair and honest, right? Reasonable degree of skills and care, and disclosures. Right? So, right here. Honesty, fair dealing, reasonable care and skill, proper disclosure. Okay. Now, as we read, as an agent, you have the duty to deal fairly and honestly with the customer. I did explain that when somebody comes to a restaurant, sits down, they're the customer, and we'll serve them. We'll do the best that we can while serving them, while upholding our client's best interest, getting paid, for instance, right? Our client getting paid, not you. So you cannot deceive, defraud, or otherwise take advantage of a customer. Even though you don't represent them, you cannot do anything that would endanger their position either, okay? Got fraud today? That is awesome. I don't know if you guys heard, but so we're talking about being defrauded or being deceived. So she bought a Groupon for a massage place, for a spa, right? And when she called in, because there was no specifications on the Groupon, she called in and said, hey, I have a Groupon. They told her that she could only book during the week because weekends are fully booked, right? And she called back in as a regular customer, hey, no Groupons, no nothing. And they said, when would you like? So she said Sunday, and they said, okay. So if you're a Groupon customer during the week, if you're not a Groupon customer, your weekend is okay. Without specifying, by the way. All right, reasonable care and skill means that an agent will be held to the standards of knowledge, expertise, and ethics that are commonly maintained by other agents in the area. I think we just talked about that, right? Ethics. That's the Groupon example. You got to treat everybody fairly and honestly. Proper disclosure primarily concerns disclosure of agency, property condition, and environmental hazards. Now, what does it mean, disclosure of agency? Who can tell me? What does it mean, disclosure of agency? What is agency? Nope. What is agency? Nope. Agency is not a place. It's a brokerage. Nope. Agency means employer-employee relationship. That's all it means. So disclosing agency means you have to tell the customer that you represent the client. So you have to give notice to the buyer that you represent the seller, or you have to give notice to the seller that you represent the buyer. Guys, this is always going to be confusing because of certain. You guys are going to realize this even when we do financing, mortgages, right? That certain words, we're so used to it on a daily basis that it's tough to bring you to what this book means, right? It's tough to bring you to what you need for the exam, like mortgage. We're going to talk about mortgages. Who gives the mortgage? Usually you think it's the lender. It's not. It's the owner, right? I'm gonna explain that when we get there. But agency is not the real estate agency, right? It's a real estate brokerage. Agency means you're representing someone. The word agency means you're representing someone. Who are you representing? Whoever hired you. Who hired you? The client or the principal? It could be the seller, it could be the buyer, it could be the landlord, it could be the tenant. The key is that somebody hired you and created an agency, employer-employee relationship that comes with the duties, fiduciary duties, care, obedience, accounting, loyalty, closure. That is agency. Okay? And you guys are going to make that mistake several times along the way, and it's totally fine. Hopefully by the time we're done with a class, finally finally in your head. All right? Next, an agent who fails to live up to the prevailing standards may be held liable for negligence, fraud, or violation of state real estate license laws and regulations. Agents should be particularly careful about misrepresenting and offering inappropriate expert advice when working with customers. There's something called intentional misrepresentation. What is intentional misrepresentation? You're doing it on purpose. Therefore, you're creating fraud. You are defrauding a buyer, right, by misrepresenting the property condition, for instance. Okay, if you do it on purpose, if you know, I'll give you the example of the mold, as we said before. If you know that the seller told you there's mold in the basement, or if you saw the mold, you're not going to avoid telling that to the buyer. That's defrauding the buyer. That's intentional misrepresentation. Hey, let's not tell them, because this way they'll pay top dollar. I get top commission, and you also, seller, get top dollar back for the sale of your property. So if we don't tell anyone, right, we're good. Except if you intentionally defraud somebody, you'll come to haunt you up to 6 years in the state of New Jersey, and different years in different states. Regardless of who you represent, if you know about it and you intentionally or unintentionally defrauded the buyer by misrepresenting or concealing facts. Okay? Then there's also negligence. Negligence means you did not do your job right. You should have known. By the way, should is over here on this side. I'm just writing right here so it's easier for you. You should have known. So you were, like Ruth just wrote, you were careless. You did not do your job right. For instance, if I'm supposed to do a visual inspection of the property, I'm not responsible for, like here, guys cannot see it, but I have drop ceiling. I'm not responsible to get on top of a ladder, check what's above the drop ceiling. That's not my responsibility. But it is my responsibility to check everything around, up, down, see what's around, okay? And if I see something like a spot on the drop ceiling, I should ask if there's a potential leak on the roof, for instance, right? If the seller is aware of any damages to the property, it is our job. You guys understand? So if you're negligent, you did not do your job. You're expected to be better than this, right? Like Legia just wrote, not professional. You were expected to be better than that. You were not professional enough. You did not carry on your duties the way you're supposed to, right? So that's negligent misrepresentation. Could you get sued for being negligent? Yeah, absolutely. What about, I talked about this before the break, what about misrepresentation of expertise? How about you're saying, hey, listen, all you have to do, guys, very simple. You have such a big room here, we can cut this in half and make it 2 rooms. There's enough room here in this school. There's enough room to make it 2 rooms. And just so you guys know, I have a door right here and I have a door back there. So because there's two doors here, right, I can definitely make 2 rooms, right? Is that something that as a realtor or as a salesperson, as a broker salesperson, is that something that we should be disclosing or representing to our clients? No. We have to figure out if it is possible. How do we figure out if that's possible? Well, there are architects, right? There's city inspectors, right? These are the ones that are going to tell you what you can and cannot do with your property. Simple. Legia, you can change the blueprint. Yeah, but where do we change the blueprint? Again, architect, submit it to the city, and they'll determine if yes or no. Not me, the realtor. Like, yeah, you know what? You can put the roof at the bottom and you make the basement on top. Therefore, you can rent the basement now. Sure, we could do that. Ruth says, not my monkey. I'm getting there. I'll play that video in a second. So now, can I tell them you can go? Hold on. Can I tell them you can go broker insurance company? You'll get a discount. Could you, Sanam, could you write that in a different way? I'm not sure I understand what your question is there. Legia says Portuguese. What are you trying to say about Portuguese? Everything passes inspection. I don't know what you're saying, but everything passes inspection, if that's what you're trying to say. That's why we do it over the weekend, so the inspectors are not there. Simple. On Monday, it's approved. Sanam, you can suggest the inspection company. Yes, you can suggest everything. You cannot. We don't hire them, but we can suggest the inspectors. We can suggest the mortgage company. We can suggest the attorneys. We can suggest everybody. We do not hire them, and we cannot force it. It's still ultimately up to the buyer or the seller to determine who they're going to work with. Okay? Now, misrepresentation of expertise, again, you should not act, this is in green, or speak outside of your area of expertise. For example, an agent represents that a property will appreciate. The buyer interprets this as an expert investment advice and buys the property. If the property does not appreciate, if it does not increase in value, that's what it means, appreciate, increase in value, then the buyer may hold the agent liable. I guarantee you right about now is 99% of the realtors are saying that. For the past 5 years, they've been saying that. Buy now because it's going to increase in price. They've been saying that. It's never going to stop increasing. They've been saying that. Till we get to a 2008, 2009 crisis where it just drops. Right? I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I cannot promise you that's going to increase in value. I can only look at what's happening now, and I can tell you that over the past couple of months, it's been increasing at X percentage. So it is most likely going to keep on increasing up to a certain point, but you have to be aware that there's always a possibility that the market will stall or even drop. It's our job, guys. But no realtor wants to say that. You don't want to say, client, buy this house, it might drop tomorrow. No realtor wants to say that. Right? That's why you shouldn't either advise that buy this now, because in 6 months it's going to be worth $50,000 more. You guys don't know how many realtors were doing that, at least here in the area. They're really doing that. Like, hey, buy now. 6 months from now, worst case scenario, you sell the property and you make 50K. Like that. Well, people will do it, and then fortunately they do not know that they can do it back, right? And of course, all realtors will say, well, who would have known that the market was going to crash? Well, don't make a statement. What professionals should we recommend them if they want to know that? Well, it's not only a professional. Are you the expert in your local market? Have you? Do you have any idea how to analyze? Like, we're going to talk about this in chapter 15, how to analyze the economic market, right? And you need to know that every city has their own market. We cannot look at New York and think it's the same thing here. We cannot look at Pennsylvania and think it's the same thing here, right? So you have to know your local market. And when I say that, like I'm in New Jersey, I'm in Newark, I cannot look at Manalapan and say it's the same here in Newark. It's not the same. Totally different market. So you need to be aware of the current market that you're in. Be the professional at the current market that you're in. If you're not, like if you ask me right now about something about Linden, I know it's been doing well, but I have no idea what's happening there. I have an overall knowledge. I don't have an in-depth knowledge, so I cannot give you that type of advice. Let's find a local realtor that can give you that type of advice. You see what I'm saying? Right? But also we can talk to appraisers that have been seeing the differences. Right? We can also talk to financial analysts and all that stuff. The bottom line is there's always a degree of risk. Doesn't matter who gives you advice. There's always a degree of risk. And you can cover yourself with that risk. You can cover by simply saying, listen, this is my opinion. This is what I've seen. This is what I've experienced. But there's always a chance of market drop. Disclose, disclose, disclose. That's your safeguard right there. Okay? All right. The obligations of a principal in an agency relationship concern the following. Availability. In a special agency, the power and decision-making authority of the agent are limited. Therefore, the principal must be available for consultation, direction, and decision-making. Otherwise, the agent cannot complete the job. So technically, the seller or the buyer also have a role that they play here. They cannot just say, hey, I hired you and go ahead, find me a property and that's it. No. There has to be close communication because, to answer your question, because they have to be available to answer questions as well. They have to be available for decision making. It's not you, it's them. Okay? Information, right here. The principal must provide the agent with a sufficient amount of information to complete the desired activity. There's a lot of people that, especially when the market was starting to go up, a lot of people say, hey, Bruno, find me good deals. I'm like, okay, if I'm an investor too, so if I find a good deal, you know where it's going, right? Now, there are good deals that don't make sense to me, but might make sense to you. So what exactly are you looking for? Are you looking for single families? Are you looking for multifamilies? Up to 4, 10, 100? How much money do you have? So let's be specific about it. Provide me the information of what you desire and what's your goal. And I'll look based on that. Right? The majority of people, the so-called investors, all they say is find me a good deal. Doesn't matter what it is. And then push comes to shove. Hey, Douglas, I found this deal. It's a great deal. Look, you buy it today, at current market, it's already worth another 100,000. So if you don't do anything, you just paint it up a little bit, cosmetic work, you make 100K right off the bat. And Douglas is like, oh, but that's a single family. I really don't want those. So wait, you made me go around and find a great deal for something you don't want? Yeah, no, that's not the type of property I want. All right, this is just an example. Sometimes people are like, oh, I want 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Great. And then we send them a bunch of 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And then it's like, oh, it doesn't have a garage. Oh, the parking. Oh, the schools. Oh, okay, so tell me what you need. Right? So one of the things that I do is I sit down with my client and ask all this information as soon as possible. Right? So I figure out what they want. Right? The second thing I do is I send them a blast of properties and then let them decide from those properties which ones are the closest match to what they want. From there on, if you cannot figure out what these people want, then there's a problem with you as well. Okay? Am I guaranteeing that whatever you find based on that first search and your first interview is going to be what they want? No, because buyers change their mind the way I change my underwear every day. So it's just the way it is. Sometimes oh, I don't know how people can survive without showers and. But anyway, to each his own. The point is, people change their minds constantly. What they thought they wanted, right? And then they start seeing like, yeah, I guess instead of this, I want that, right? I've had buyers where they say, oh, I want this particular location, right? 2 weeks later, I'm showing 3 different locations, like 3 different towns. A month later, this is back in the day, I don't play that game anymore. A month later is like, oh no, you know what? As long as it's in Jersey, I'm good. Like, wait a minute. We started off with Newark, right? Then we had Newark, we had Belleville, we had Nutley, and now we're the whole Jersey? No, yeah, I can't play like that. So you're fired. That's it. Come back to me whenever you think you're ready. If not, it was nice to meet you. Right? Simple as that. You guys know that the app what says swipe left to reject or right to reject? Huh? You're talking about the dating app, yeah. What is it called? She's just laughing over here. You guys know what I'm talking about? Ah, some people know. Was it left or right to reject? Which one is it? Bumble. What the heck is Bumble? You got 2 Bumbles and some not Tinders. Yeah. You already knew. You're just waiting for somebody else to say it. All right, but anyway, it's the same thing with the properties and the clients, right? Swipe whatever it is to reject. I don't know which one it is, but swipe whatever it is. Swipe left, let's say. You don't have to deal with all the people. There's like 9 million people in the state of New Jersey. Thank you. Next. That's the way it is, okay? Simple as that. Well, I'm easy with the food. You're saying people can't decide with the food? I'm just like, tell me where to go. That's it. All right. Compensation. If an agreement includes a provision for compensating an agent and the agent performs in accordance with the agreement, the client is obligated to compensate the agent as indicated. As indicated earlier, however, the agency relationship does not necessarily include compensation. So if you've done your job, sorry? No. I'll explain the compensation in a second. But as far as this one right here, if you hire by the buyer and the seller agreed to pay, once you completed your part, they might have to pay, right? If you've done your job and they back out, you can sue for compensation as well. Okay? Simple. Now, an agent is liable for breach of duty to a client or customer. So because the customers and clients, they rely on your expertise, if you don't do what you're supposed to, even though you don't represent them, like their customers, they're still relying on you being the expert. If there's something that you do that hurts the customer, right? Again, like I said, hiding stuff for your clients, you could be sued by that customer as well. So you represent the seller, the buyer finds out that you hid something from them, you could get sued as well by the other party. So, correct. No, it's something that could endanger, that must be disclosed. Right? So anything that could affect the transaction that you're hiding must be disclosed. Calvin's asking, does that still apply with commercials? So far, we're talking about real estate transactions, period. All right? Real estate transactions, period. So there's stuff that must be disclosed. Commercial, the building's falling apart. right? Here I am putting my business here. The building's falling apart. I'm on the 3rd floor. If the building falls apart while we're up here, careful, right? Same thing. It's commercial, Calvin. It's commercial. It doesn't matter. Okay. You felt it forcing? I know. Sometimes it does. Still applies. All right. Now, breach of duty may result in rescission of the listing agreement, may result in forfeiture of any compensation that already been earned, disciplinary action by state licensed law authorities, including your suspension or revocation, and even getting sued for damages in court. So the first two is like, whatever. I can get another client. I can get more commission somewhere else. It's okay. But the last two could cost your business. You could lose your license and get sued for damages. That's breach of duty. So if you don't do what you're supposed to do. All right. Forms of real estate agency. What does the word agency mean, guys? I haven't asked enough. Agency, let me know in the chat. YouTubers, Zoomers, let me know in the chat. What does the word agency mean? Employer-employee relationship, agency. So when you're hired by somebody, right, you represent them. Very good. Now, there's the Beyonce type of agency, called a single agency, right? That's what it says. There you go. There's a single agency. There's no ring there. So you represent only one party. Or... no? I'm going to skip sub-agency for now. And we have dual agency. So you have single, and then you have dual agency where we represent both. So single, you represent one party only. Both sides. Okay? And there's also, nope, not getting married. I'm going to represent 0. Okay? Those are the key ones to remember. Single agency, you represent either the seller or the buyer. Okay? Dual agency, you represent both sides, right? Both the seller and the buyer. And then no agency, don't represent either one of them. Okay? This is the no agency is the one that's most complicated to remember. But again, single agency, 1. Dual agency, represent both. No agency, represent neither. Very, very important because there's a lot of questions regarding this in the state exam. Now, the primary forms of agency relationship between the brokers and principals are single agency, dual agency, and sub-agency. The fourth kind of relationship is referred to as transaction brokerage, and there's no agency relationship. You represent the transaction, not the people. You're trying to facilitate the transaction. Okay, that's it. I'll explain this better when we get there. Where it says sub-agency, it's not heavily tested, so I don't worry too much about it, and especially because some states, or a lot of states actually, are beginning to disallow sub-agency. So they're not allowing sub-agency to exist. So we're going to kind of like skim over that, okay? Next page, we are on page 147. Just a quick summary. We have forms of agency and no agency in real estate brokerage. Okay. So single agency, that means the agent, broker, represents the client. Which could be the seller or the buyer. the landlord or the tenant. Okay? Sub-agency, like I said, I'm going to kind of like skip it. I'll explain this better in a little bit. And we're going to go to dual agency. Dual agency, you represent both. Okay? You represent both. This is the broker. Every time you see agent, we're talking about broker. Because the broker is the agent. He or she is the agent. Okay? Then there's no agency. If you see the difference here is the dashes means no representation. Straight line means representation. Okay? So as a no agency or transaction broker, that means no agency, you do not represent either party. Write this down. As a transaction broker, you do not represent either party. Okay. So, single, one. Easy, right? So the agent represents one party in the transaction. We already covered that. The client may be either the seller or the buyer. Okay. If it says seller agency, that means you represent the seller, right? It says right here, very simple. You represent the seller as the client, and the buyer is the customer. Okay, we already covered this, so you guys should be aware of this so far, right? No questions, right? Okay, great. If you represent the buyer, then the buyer is the client, and the property owner is the customer. So the roles reverse. It just depends on who you represent. So, real estate vernacular calls an agent of the seller or owner a listing broker. Means seller's broker. Okay. Listing broker represents a seller. Okay, that means the person that lists the property for sale. And the buyer's broker obviously represents the buyer. We also call this the selling broker. Okay. Why am I putting this here? Because it gets confusing. Every time you see selling broker, most of you think, well, represents the seller. No. Right? This is where I want you guys to think of. This is my phone. I'm going to list my phone for sale. Okay? And then one of you is going to find me a buyer. So who accomplished the sale? Right? Let's say Gloria. Gloria, you're the one that's going to bring a buyer. Right? Who accomplished the sale? Was it me that put it for sale, or was you that brought the buyer? Is it Gloria or me? Why? Why me? I'm just advertising. Guys, I'm just advertising. I'm listing it. That's all. Okay? The one that accomplishes the sale is the one that brings the buyer and closes the deal. That's the selling broker. Right? Think about it this way. When you go to Walmart, there's a cell phone there. Right? You go to Walmart, there's a cell phone there. Listed. It's just there. Who's selling it? No, Walmart. It's there. Okay? And then as I walk around, there's those people that, well, not at Walmart because they're not very savvy, but no offense if you work at Walmart. What I meant is for sales. For sales. Like, I don't know if you guys remember CompUSA, or if you remember, I lost the name. I just had it. But back in the day, different types of tech companies or stuff for the house, they would actually have salespeople that would come and get you at the door. Almost like they're trying to sell you a timeshare. Hey, what's up? Welcome. By the way, great TVs, great sofas, great all stereo and all that stuff integrated. right? They'll get you at the door and drag you through the whole place, right? At Walmart, it's like, yeah, I don't want to be here either. So do you want the phone or not? Right? It's like going to Applebee's. Nobody cares. So Walmart lists, it's right there. Okay? A salesperson says, hey, Jazz, do you want to buy this phone? This phone is great. This is what it has. And starts talking about the features of the phone. Stop shaking your head. Go with the example. But starts talking about the features. I accomplished a sale if I'm telling you, Chaz, this is a great phone. It's the best phone you could ever get, right? Buy it now. And if Chaz buys, who accomplished the sale? I'm the one that brought the buyer. I accomplished the sale. I'm the selling broker. You guys understand? Work for Metro PCS? There you go. So you are the selling. You're not the seller. You're the selling agent, the selling broker. Okay? So whoever accomplishes the sale is the one that's sold. The listing agent puts it for sale. The buyer's agent accomplishes the sale. Okay? So this is something you need to remember. The selling broker is you. Metro or Walmart, as Carly just wrote here, is the listing agent. Okay? So who accomplished the sale? The selling broker or the buyer's broker. Whoever represents the buyer. Remember that. Have to remember that. Okay. All right, Brandon, no problem. I saw your message. Leisure, yep. Listing broker, Walmart. Selling broker, you. What about co-brokerage? You're still writing? All right. Your hand is starting to hurt. Co-brokerage. What does that mean? Co-brokering a deal, that means you're not working just with Walmart. So let's imagine, let's go to Amazon real quick. Amazon. If I sell my own products on Amazon, right, it's my products that I'm advertising on the Amazon platform. So I'm co-brokering with Amazon. Amazon's selling for me. I list it on Amazon, and Amazon, through their services, they're working with me. You understand? So co-brokerage is when you represent Century 21, and here comes a Remax agent, right? Comes a Remax agent and brings a potential buyer. Okay, these are outsiders. Can I go? Okay, these are outsiders, and we are required to cooperate with agents from another agency. Okay, so if they're representing Remax, if they're representing Weicker, if they're representing whatever it is that you don't represent, these are outsiders, right? You're co-brokering with them. Okay, usually when we put on the MLS, that's what it is. It's a co-brokerage. Okay, it says right here, a listing broker in return agrees to share commission with a cooperating broker. Every time we are co-brokering, right, we are sharing commission with them. In fact, that's what we do on the MLS. On the MLS, we put there, hey, potential buyer's agent or selling broker, right? Potential buyer's agent. If you bring a buyer, I'm giving you 2.5%. I'm giving you 2%. I'm giving 3, 4, whatever it is. It's going to be on the listing on the MLS. So we share our commission with them. Yep. Co-brokering. Okay. Ruth, if anything, co-brokering agreement. All right. Now, the broker, salesperson, we got that. Dual agency. Let's focus on this one for a second. If it's dual agency, you represent both sides. You represent both the seller and the buyer, or the landlord and the tenant. That means you're hired by the seller, right? And then through your advertisement, you found a buyer that has no one representing them. And you said, hey, would you like me to represent you? Or they asked you if you could represent them. Once you make that agreement, you're representing both. Dual agency. Now, dual agency means representing both parties, principal parties to a transaction, and represents both the buyer and seller or tenant and owner. For instance, if a salesperson completes a buyer agency agreement for a party on behalf of a broker, and the party becomes interested in the property listed by the broker, then the broker becomes a dual agency. Now, dual agency has become increasingly prevalent with the advent of buyer and tenant representation. Dual agency may arise from voluntary specific agreement between the principal parties, or from the parties' actions, much like implied single agency. The problem with dual agency is this: conflict of interest. Why is it conflict of interest? Because if I represent the seller, my first duty is to the seller, then everybody else. But if I represent the buyer, my first duty is to the buyer, then everybody else. But if I represent both, I'm kind of like stuck in the middle. Who do I lean towards? Do I lean towards the seller? Do I lean towards the buyer? Who do I lean towards? I can't. I have to be neutral. So I'll have to work to the best of my ability, right, to not create a conflict of interest, right? So it is difficult, but not impossible. That's why they allow it. As long as, this is the most important thing, there's informed written consent. Informed written consent. That means saying you're working for both. That means you disclosed to both parties. It was a voluntary act. Okay? For dual agency to be legal, for dual agency to be authorized, you must have told, hey, seller, I represent the buyer. Hey, buyer, I represent the seller. If you guys are okay, please sign this document. They have to be fully aware of what they can expect from you. When you represent both, they must be fully aware of what they can expect from you. That's what it says here. Okay? So principals must agree in writing to proceed. You cannot hide it. If you hide it, if you represent both and neither one knows about each other, you could lose your license and get sued big time because of the conflict of interest. You're taking advantage for your own personal gain. Okay? Now, if it's implied or undisclosed dual agency, right? Implied or undisclosed, if a broker or agent acts in any way that leads, so again, based on actions implied, that leads the customer to believe that the agent is representing the customer, a dual agency has potentially been created. For example, a buyer makes confidential disclosures to the agent who works for the seller and exhorts the agent to keep them confidential. So before we move forward, this might be a potential question in the state exam, exactly as it is here. You represent the seller, a potential buyer shows up at an open house, right? But you represent the seller. Buyer looks at it and says, I want to make an offer, this is my current situation, but don't tell anyone, right? I have to be fair. Even though I don't represent you, I have to be fair and honest. We talked about this before, right? I cannot make any type of implication or representation that I will do certain things for you when I don't represent you. So my job is to be fair and honest and let you know, potential buyer, listen, I represent the seller. So unless you tell me to represent you as well, anything you told me right now can and will be used against you in this transaction. It's like the Miranda rights. Anything you tell me, be ready to let him know that. Anything you tell me can and will be used against you in this transaction. So, Mr. Buyer, if you tell me that you have more money in the bank, what do you think I'm going to tell my clients? I represent the seller, not you. But if you tell me to represent you as well, I'll keep these things confidential. You guys understand? So if it's implied or if it's undisclosed, it's illegal. You have to notify the other side who you represent. Okay, very important. That's it. Okay. Unless they hire you. Unless they hire you, of course. See how it is? Blackmail. You want me not to say something? Sign right here that I represent you. That's it. Oh, that's not what you... No? Okay. Right here. If the agent fails to disclose the buyer's confidence to the seller, then I have violated the fiduciary duty to the seller. Okay? So if, because I represent the seller, right? If the buyer tells me, please don't disclose, and I don't disclose, something that I know, something that's factual, something that could affect the transaction, then the seller, if he or she finds out that I knew about it, can sue me. I knew that the buyer had more money. I knew that the buyer was, lowballing the deal when they could afford more. I forced kind of the transaction to happen that way, right? So I could get sued. All right. We cover this. All right, right here. If both parties, right at the bottom of the page, if both parties accept the dual agency, the agent owes all the fiduciary duties to both parties except full disclosure, undivided loyalty, and exclusive representation of one's principal interest. Okay? So I cannot give full disclosure because I represent both parties. Anything that's confidential, I gotta keep confidential. Okay? I cannot be more loyal to one side or loyal to the other. All right, Sanam, hold on a second, I'm sorry. Sanam says she cannot hear me. If you're watching on YouTube, I see there's more people watching. If you're watching on YouTube, give me a thumbs up or let me know in the Zoom chat, in the YouTube chat, if you can hear me or not, please. Thank you. What were you saying? Kathy? Question. No. Nope, you gotta be loyal to both. Where are you? If you represent both, then you gotta be loyal to both. The problem is you cannot be more to one or to the other. It has to be equal to both. Correct. All right, Mr. Gill is in the house. What's up? All right, next. All right, in recent years, we're going to talk about no agency. That's the transaction broker. Because you do not represent, so there's no agency. Agency is representation, right? Agency is, Happy New Year, man. Happy New Year. So agency is when you represent somebody, when you got hired by someone. So there's always the transaction broker. As a transaction broker, you represent no one. You are merely a facilitator. So, Edith, you come to me and say, hey, Bruno, I want to buy this house. Right? Hey, great. I'll show you the house around, right? I'll open the door for you. I'll draft the documents, but don't expect anything other than that from me. All right? If you want me to represent you, then I'll go in deeper and do a visual inspection. I'll recommend certain things like a home inspector, like I'll still tell you a couple of these things, but I will not put all my efforts into the transaction. You understand? All I'm doing for you is filling out paperwork and giving you brief advice of what's the next step. That's what a transaction broker does. That's what a facilitator does. I'm just facilitating the transaction. I don't represent you. I don't represent the seller. I'm just helping you. Yeah, I'm just filling out docs. That's it. And opening doors for you. Okay? That's it. The rest is on you. Hold on. Carly, who does not owe commission? The person you're not representing? So you're telling me the representation determines the compensation? Didn't we talk about this before? Agency does not determine compensation. Compensation is determined by agreement. Okay? So if the seller already agreed to pay whoever brings a buyer, right? And you're helping the buyer, but you don't represent the buyer, right? You're helping the buyer. There's two different things. One thing is helping. Another thing is representing. Representing, I go above and beyond. Helping, right, is just making sure that they know the steps. That's it. Making sure they fill out the blanks properly. We're going to help them fill out the blanks. That's all, right? So we're not fully liable as we would be when we represent the buyer. But the seller's still willing to pay whoever brings a buyer. It's just I don't represent them. I found them on the street. Come on. Here's a house. Right? So let's go over this and then you'll understand a little bit better. Fill out what papers? Contracts. All the papers. I'm just helping you fill out papers. That's all. All right. Let me ask you, what's the difference between an attorney, right? What's the difference between an attorney and a company, the multi-service company that helps you prepare paperwork? Like maybe tax preparation, maybe immigration paperwork. What's the difference between an attorney and filling out paperwork? Multi-service company. Attorney fights for you. Expertise. Well, you could be the expert as well, but you cannot rely on me. That in the transaction broker, I'm the expert. I have to treat you fair and honestly and all that stuff. But then the attorney represents you. The attorney fights for you. That's the difference. That's the biggest difference. Because filling out paperwork, guess who fills out the paperwork? It's the paralegal. It's not the attorney. Guess who the paralegal works for? For me. I'm not an attorney. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? The difference is the representation. That's the difference. The job is still the same at the end of the day, which is preparing the paperwork, the right paperwork to get to that goal. The difference is, do you want to be prepared if something goes wrong? That's when you hire the attorney versus some document preparer company, right? You guys got it? So transaction broker, you're telling me that if you go to a multi-service company to help you prepare the documents or fill in the documents for immigration, you don't pay them? Because they don't represent you? Is that what it is? Because I'll let you know right now, if you come to my office and say, Bruno, fill out this paperwork, but I'm not paying you, I'll tell you bye-bye. Right? That's what it is. We're still entitled to get paid, guys. Transaction broker, all it does, let's go over this. In recent years, the brokerage industry has striven to clear up the question of who works for whom, right? And who owes fiduciary duties to whom. A recent solution allows a broker to represent no one in a transaction. That is, that the broker acts as a transaction broker and is not an agent of either the buyer or the seller. In this relationship, the facilitator does not advocate the interests of either party. I'm not putting anyone first. That's the only difference. I'm just helping you prepare the docs. I'm just helping you go from point A to point B. That's it. Our duties. Pay attention to our duties. What we do as a transaction broker. Just like an agent, we have to account for all the money and property received. So I cannot mishandle monies. I have to exercise reasonable skill and care. I don't have to go above and beyond, but reasonable skill and care. I have to provide honesty and fair dealing so I can still not lie to you or deceive you. I have to present all offers in a timely fashion, assist the parties in closing the transaction, keep the parties fully informed, advise the parties to obtain expert advice or counsel, disclose to both parties in residential sales transaction all material facts affecting the property's value. So this is regardless of being an agent or not, we still have to go through these things. And protect the confidences of both parties in matters that would materially disadvantage one party over the other. And you're probably thinking, wait a minute, isn't that the same thing as being an agent? No, because there's things that we're not required right here. What duties are not imposed on you? Since there's no fiduciary duties binding the transaction broker, the broker is held to standards for dealing with customers as opposed to clients. So all we have to be is honest, have fair dealing, and reasonable care. That's it. I'm under no obligation to inspect the property for the benefit of the party or verify the accuracy of statements made by the party. Not an agent. I'm a transaction broker. It's what I just said right now. I'm not required. So if I'm preparing documents for immigration, I'm not required to go above and beyond and research what that immigration document says or does. All I'm doing is doc prep. What does that mean? I'm filling in the blanks. The goal is still the same, but you got to know what you want. That's it. The goal is still the same. I'm just preparing docs. That's all. I'll open the doors for you to inspect the property, but it's not my duty to go inspect the property to see what's happening, right? It's not my duty to do that. Simple. There's an agreement that states no agency. Correct. Yep. So all the agreements come with the check boxes. Seller's agent, buyer's agent, disclosal agent, or transaction broker. Those are the 4 options that you have. So, Joanna, you're not hired as an agent. Okay? You're hired only to prepare documents and walk through the transaction all the way to the end. That's it. Okay? Right here. As the state regulatory authorities formalize the facilitator role, it is expected that brokers will have to obtain written consent from principal parties, just as you would in dual agency. What does this mean? Guys, you need to be fully aware, and you have to make the client or customer fully aware of your duties. Do I represent you? Do I represent the other party? Do I represent nobody? And if that's so, what can you expect from me? If I represent you, this is what you could expect from me. If I represent the other party, this is what you can expect from me. If I don't represent either one, this is what you can expect from me. If I represent both, this is what you can expect from me. So we're supposed to disclose all these things that we're going over in this chapter, right? There's a summary. Every state has some type of summary form. So for instance, here in the state of New Jersey, it's called a Consumer Information Statement. We'll have it in a different chapter, so don't worry right now. But it's a simple form that explains to each potential client or customer what they can expect from us. So all this will be expressed in that document. You are responsible for understanding the document beginning to end. Okay? So very, very important. You're going to have a bunch of questions about being a listing agent or a seller's agent, being a buyer's agent, being a disclosure agent, or transaction broker. There's a bunch of questions in the state exam. Guys, make sure your cameras are on, please. It does not count if you don't have your cameras on. Very important. I'm telling you, this is the same thing as dealing with kids. 150, page 150. This is kind of like a summary. You guys already know this. So the objectives of disclosure. Pretty much to remove confusion about who you work for. So as I said right now, there's a form, every state has a form that explains who you represent, okay? It lets you know what you can expect from us, right? Your choices, right? And finally, do you accept? Simple. Every state has some type of form to help you, the agent, prevent or protect yourself from being sued. How can you protect yourself from being sued? Hey, I disclosed right here that this is who I represent or not. I disclose right here what are the duties in this type of representation or standards, right? I represented also or explain what choices the client or customer have. Because yeah, you can choose. If I tell you I don't want to represent you, say, hey, no, but I want you to represent me, right? You can choose to say, if you're not representing me, I don't want to work with you. I can also, as an agent, I can choose to say, well, I don't want to represent you. I don't want to be a transaction broker. I don't want that type of liability. So you're always welcome to walk away from the transaction, whether you're the client or the customer or the agent. Nobody's obligated to anything. But that's why we have to disclose these things, right? Right here. Right here. Obtain acknowledgement and acceptance of the disclosure form from the principal parties. So now they cannot say, oh, I never received it. It's a form. It's a form you fill out. You don't have to write letters. You don't have to put perfume or cologne onto it. No. Hey, this is what it is. Not a love letter. Standard forms, fill in the blanks. Did you understand it? That's it. Sorry? You don't know what a love letter is? Seriously? Ah, he's alive. Mr. Morales. All right, let's see. Is a transaction broker. Right, sorry, I was told to pick on you too, so I just left it until now. Your friends are awesome, by the way, guys. Whoever recommended to this class, most of them went like, hey, pick on them. Okay. You don't have to tell me twice. So I've been letting the shy guy be quiet. So is a transaction broker always involved when buying a home? No. It could either be a seller's agent, buyer's agent, disclosure agent, or transaction broker. The only question here is, the question is if the transaction broker is always involved. The only question here, Victor, is how do you represent them? It's you. The transaction broker is you. The seller's agent is you. The buyer's agent is you. The disclosure agent is you. Which checkbox did you check? That's all. That's it. Yeah, whether you represent or not. So that's you. Okay, when we say transaction broker is just a type of representation. Okay, in either one of these, you are a broker because you represent your broker. In either one of these. The difference is when you call yourself an agent, that means you're representing the client. That's all it is. When you're a transaction broker, just brokering, helping broker or facilitate the deal. That's all it is. Okay? Right here. Recent legislation requires an agent to disclose to all parties the fact that the agent represents one party, does not represent another. In other words, the agent must inform the client and customer that the agent represents the client and does not represent the customer, unless it's a dual agency. What does this mean? You can deal with both parties, representing one and not the other. You guys remember when I said earlier that you're holding an open house, right? For those of you yawning, I did tell you to get coffee, right? I did tell you to get tea or do some jumping jacks. I tell you every time, get the blood flowing. We're almost done. I'll send you home, or you're already home. Anyway, so you guys remember when I told you about the open house? So you represent the seller, you're doing an open house, and the buyer walks in, right? You do not represent the buyer, they just walked in. So technically, just like in a restaurant, they just walked in, they're a customer, correct? Good so far? All right. So if the customer decides to put an offer, but does not expressly hires you, they do not express their desire to hire you, you do not express, hey, would you like to be hired? I mean, would you like to hire me, right? Yeah. If you do not make that expressly stated, or if you did not imply based on your actions, then who's your client? The seller. Who's your customer? That buyer that walked in, right? But you have to disclose, again, that even though I'm helping you prepare the documentation for this property, anything that you say can and will be used against you in this transaction. Because I represent who? Seller. Okay, so that's what it says right here. It's okay to represent one party and help another, but you have to be clear to both parties what they can expect from you. Questions? It's the Miranda rights. That's it. Questions? And we go home. We still have chapter 12. All right, Anna has a question. What did you say? I didn't say anything. Right, guys? We still have chapter 12. We got plenty of time until midnight. The problem is printing. I'll printing right now. You're looking for answers there? Harley says not midnight. Okay, fine. 11:59. Brandon, I wouldn't mind. There you go. Ruth, imagine that. There you go. Hannah, waiting. Waiting for the question. Come on, you can type faster than Chrissy. All right, let's see. What if your client has a problem with you helping a customer? Well, this is why we do the disclosures, right? This is why you do the disclosures. You have to explain what they can expect from you. So you let them know, hey, I don't represent them. I'm just providing assistance in preparing the paperwork. Yeah, that's all you're doing. Vice versa. But whoever you're representing, you have to notify them of what you're doing. That's it. I don't represent them. My utmost priority is you, client. You're not giving information. I'm protecting your best interest still. All I'm doing is preparing paperwork so I can facilitate this transaction. That's it. All right. We already went over all of this. All of it, all of it, all of it, all of it. And we're done. How was this chapter for you guys? Any questions? Was it good? Was it bad? All right. Good. My favorite chapter? There you go. Better be, because it's the most tested chapter. That's why, look, this is only 12 pages in this chapter, but I spend a lot of time on it because, again, too many questions in the exam. Sanam's asking how many questions come from this chapter. So there's this chapter in the national portion, and there's the state chapter on agency. Pretty much the same, just one or two extra details. But there's about 20 questions. Yep, it's 22 questions actually in the state exam here in New Jersey. Depending on the state you're in, it's different. But here in New Jersey, it's 22 questions. And then there's another 11 questions from another chapter, which relates to this. When we get to that page, I'll tell you. To that chapter, I'll tell you. But it is 30% of the exam somehow involves agency. Okay? So somehow involves agency. Letting you know right now. 30% of the exam somehow involves agency. So when we get to contracts, when we get to listings, when we get to leases, as we did before already, they all integrate with agency, right? So if you don't know this to the core, like this is like the must-know thing, agency. And you saw how some of you still struggle in figuring out who do you represent or not. All the questions regarding agency right now, so you guys know, all the questions regarding agency are pretty much scenarios. Being scenarios, like, hey, you're the listing agent for this person, and then buyer shows up and does this or does that. What are you required to do? And then give you 4 options. They're all scenarios. They're not definitions. So if you're not comfortable with this, correct. So if you're not comfortable with this, you'll have a problem in the state exam. I'm telling you right now. This is one of those chapters. Let me see. Hold on. How long take the exam for? So the exam you have up to 4 hours to complete. Up to 4 hours to complete. How many questions are in the state exam in total? So qualifying questions, there's 110, but then when you get to the exam, there's 120 questions, but only 110 are qualifying questions. Yes, Legia. So on the calendar there, so I divided chapter 17 into two. There's part one and part two. It's one chapter. It has 20 something pages, but because it's financing, mortgages, foreclosures, there's so much going over there, and there's also, I think, 14 or 16 questions in the state exam. I also break it into two parts. Well, it's actually four parts: two on Friday and two on Monday. So I give you the weekend to relax on whatever you're going to learn on Friday because it's crazy. Then Monday we come back to it. So now, if a listing agent sends me to show a house to the buyer, and later the seller asks me if I can tell the seller the buyer response before the listing agent, that depends. That depends. Did an exclusive agency? That it depends. You got to give me more on that. Carly says I might not be here on Friday. Well, that sucks. You're not gonna have iCarly on Friday. Is there any way you cannot watch it on YouTube at least? Listen to it on YouTube? If you miss one chapter, it's not a problem. If you miss two chapters, not a problem. Now, if you miss more than that, it's a problem. The reason being is you gotta do at least 90% of the course. That 10%, you could just watch the replays and ask me questions as you go. Okay? All right, guys? Any questions? Questions? All right? So if no questions, guys, I'm gonna give you, wow, 30 minutes. No, I can't do that. No. Anthony, no. Can we go over the Chapter 12. I know. No. I will with you. All right, guys. Have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow at 5:30. Thank you.